everyone, welcome to the Jada and Stitches show. I am currently still stitching little appliques onto our garden wall hanging project, but we thought it was high time we showed you how to get it up onto the wall. So in today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make these really simple little hanging tabs that not only can you use on our garden wall hanging, but you can use on any kind of wall hanging, curtains, flat hanging, pocket organizer, any kind of flat hanging project that you want to hang on a wall or a curtain rod. This is a little doweling with balls that are firmly attached to the end, but in this video I'm going to explain to you how you can make these wider, longer, more of them, how to evenly distribute them across the top of your project, how many you should probably think about making, how to make them to accommodate fixed finials like this one, or just a regular piece of doweling, or finials that come on and off. In short, everything you need to know about how to hang a wall hanging project. It's super simple, and it's a lot of fun too. This didn't take me very long. In fact, I'm hopefully going to get the rest of my little pieces sewn onto my project today. If you'd like a written copy of today's little hanging tab pattern, we'll have that in our Etsy shop for you, and the link to that shop is in the description box down below. That pattern is in our bargain pattern section, so it's a real steal, and it explains how to make not only these, how to distribute them across the top of a project, but also how to make them to fit your particular project. So if you're making a big project down the road, or curtains or anything like that, then this little pattern will explain to you how to do it. Also, FYI, you don't just have to add them to crochet projects, you can add them to knit projects too. And without further ado, let's grab our hooks, grab our yarn, grab our wall hangings or curtains or whatever you're going to hang, grab your doweling, let's head on over to the craft table and we will stitch up and hang our wall hangings together. In order to make our little hanging tabs, we're going to use the same yarn we've been using for the project. So I recommend using the same weight and fiber category of yarn that you used for the project that you want to hang on the wall. I also recommend using the same hook size too. For demonstration today, I have a size 4 medium weight acrylic yarn. It's the same color, fiber, and size, weight category that I used for the project. You need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, and I'm using a 5.5mm hook. This is also the same hook size I used for the rest of this project. Each tab takes around 5 to 6 yards of yarn, so not very much, and you can have as many or as few of these tabs as you like. You just want to make sure that you've got enough yarn in order to complete all of your tabs. And once you've got all that together, we can get started. These tabs are attached to the top edge of your wall hanging or curtain. So this is the last row of the actual wall hanging. This is my little border that I added. I have attached the tab to the top of the last row of the wall hanging. I am not touching my little border here. Now, if you had a really solid border, like you just did some rows of single crochet, half double crochet, etc., or even shell stitch, you could opt to add your tabs to the top edge of your border, but I feel like this is sort of a neat way to kind of hide the top or the bottom edge of the tab behind your border. It doesn't really interfere with the design of the project, and all we're doing is using the back loops only. So you see there's the whole stitch of the top end of the last row of the project. The back loop is the loop furthest away from you or furthest from you, and we're going to be attaching our tabs to these back loops just to sort of anchor them there. You can also use the stitches that your border is attached to. You can just sort of share that loop or that stitch with wherever your border is anchored. You can also use a stitch more than once. You can skip a stitch. There really aren't any rules here. You just want to create evenly spaced tabs all the way across the top edge of your wall hanging. You want to make them wider if your wall hanging is large and heavy, and have them separated by fewer spaces or smaller gaps. They can be thinner or smaller if your wall hanging is medium or small sized and not very heavy, and you can have larger gaps in between if it's not a big wall hanging. And that is basically just to evenly distribute the weight of the wall hanging or the curtains as it hangs on the wall or the window. For my wall hanging today, I'm going to be adding 5 hanging tabs in total, evenly distributed across the top edge of my wall hanging. Here's number 1. It is anchored over here on sort of the, well, it is one of the very edge stitches, not the complete edge stitch, but just sort of one in from the edge. And it's 5 double crochets across, 8 rows tall, and then we fold it in half and slip stitch from the top of the last row through to the bottom of the first row. So you're just basically creating a seam with some slip stitch there. And that's it. It creates a nice little hanging tab. You can slip your dowel through that. And that is exactly what I'm going to do 4 more times all the way across, evenly distributing them. Now, it doesn't really matter how many stitches are in between where you anchor them. What you want is something that looks visually even. So I like to do this. I create the first one, I've added it there, and I'm going to zip over here and add the second one to the other side. And then I will slowly add them in the middle, so one here, or maybe I'll go right to the middle first, and then I'll put the other two evenly sort of spaced into the inside of where those all go, just so it looks even. It doesn't mean that I have to have the exact same number of stitches in between, but I do want to have the exact same number of stitches in each tab. So let's grab our hooks and our yarn and we'll get one of those started. This is the top of my wall hanging. If I flip it over, I'm looking at the back of my wall hanging, but this is the top edge. So even though it's sort of facing down, you can see my little sunshine. That was at the top of my wall hanging. This is the top edge, but it's the back. I am making my little hanging tabs to be 5 double crochets wide. So I need 5 stitches across the edge of my wall hanging to work into. So here's a stitch at the corner. I'm going to skip that one. I'm going to work sort of in, have it end 1 stitch in from the edge, just so that my wall hanging tab is just sort of recessed in a little bit. I feel that looks neater. So that's going to be my last stitch. Here's a stitch that is shared by my border. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. This stitch is also shared by my border, meaning my border stitches are anchored there, but that's okay. I'm going to use it anyway. I am using the back loop only. So I'm just going to slip my hook in to that same stitch. So you can see that it's anchored. That's my border. It's anchored in the same stitch, but I'm slipping my hook in under the back loop of that stitch only. If I push up my hook, you can see the other loop hiding there below it. I'm not using the whole thing. I'm going to anchor my yarn with a slip stitch, and then I'm going to chain 2. The chain 2 at the beginning of each row of these tabs counts as a double crochet. I am going to work over top of my short tail, but you can leave yours out and weave it in later if you like. And I'm just going to double crochet into the back loop only of each of the next 4 stitches so that my tab is 5 double crochets wide. So I'm going to try and do this without pulling it out. The next stitch, back loop only, and that's just so I don't have these stitches showing through to the front of my wall hanging. This is a stitch that is shared by one of my border stitches, so it's both anchored in the same place. Again, I'm only using the back loop of that stitch only. So that's 4, including my chain 2, and that leaves me with 1 more stitch to go. Back loop only, so I'm getting the back loop. You can see this is the whole stitch right here. That's the front loop and the back loop. If I were to use the whole stitch, I'd get my hook under the whole thing. You can see that's both loops, but then you would see it in the front, and I don't want to do that. I just want to use the back loop only, and that's just for anchoring this row of stitches. So chain 2, that counts as a double crochet. Double crochet using the back loops only into the next 4 stitches, whether or not those stitches are sharing the load with your border, that's okay. 5 double crochets to start. Chain 2 and turn. Because the chain 2 counts as a double crochet, this stitch is already accounted for. So I start in the next stitch with a double crochet, and I double crochet into each of the next 3 stitches and then into the top of the chain 2. Remember, your chain 2 counts as a double crochet. So when you get to that chain 2, double crochet right into the top of it. Find the top of those 2 chains and double crochet. That way you will maintain an even stitch count of 5 all the way across. Chain 2 counts, double crochet, double crochet, double crochet, double crochet. Chain 2, turn. Remember to skip that first stitch because your chain 2 is already using it. Double crochet into each stitch across, double crochet into the top of the chain 2, You'll have 5 stitches at the end of that row as well. Chain 2 turn. You want to do this for 8 rows total. You can make these tabs as long as you like or as short as you like if you don't feel you need a very long tab. Remember that you're going to be folding it in half, but make sure you have an even number of rows. You want to be able to finish your tab so that you are on the right side of the tab if you're working right-handed, left side of the tab if you're working left-handed. Once you have 8 rows, and you can see that my 5 double crochets along row 1, that includes my chain 2, are anchored in the back loops of those stitches along the top row of the wall hanging. A couple of them share a stitch with the anchored stitches of my border, but that's okay because when the whole thing is finished, the border will sit up in front of it, and that'll look really nice. It's also not interfering with any of my little sun rays. So 8 rows in total. You can make them longer if you need to, but remember to end on an even row. 8 is an even number. At the end of your last row, chain 1, and then you're going to fold it down towards you. So you can fold your border out of the way. And what we're going to do is we're going to slip stitch through each set of stitches, and the bottom of each of those first stitches of row 1. So the top of each stitch of row 8, the bottom of each stitch of row 1, and that is going to create a little seam, this guy right here. You're going to have a neat little slip stitch seam that creates the tab, makes it a hanger, and then all of your little border petals or border rows will sit in front of it, so it won't show and it'll look nice and neat and tidy. So here we go. That chain 1 is just for turning. It doesn't actually, or it basically gives us space to maneuver. It doesn't count as a stitch. You can put your hook through the first stitch and also through the bottom of the first stitch of row 1, so right through that bottom, out the other side, and slip stitch. Bring that loop back through both stitches and through that loop, and that's how we seam it shut. Into the next one, top of stitch from row 8, bottom of stitch from row 1, grab yarn on the back, pull back through everything to slip stitch. And that is how we create the seam. You'll have 5 slip stitches in total. When you get to the top of your chain 2, remember chain 2 counts as double crochet, so get your hook through there, get it through the bottom of that last stitch, and slip stitch, and you can fasten off. Leave a little tail for sewing, or I should say for weaving in, not sewing. Make sure that is nice and tight, and then you can weave it in back and forth across the back of your little, we've got some stitches back here. Weave it in across the back of your tab through some of those stitches in row 1 or row 2, whatever's handy. And you're going to weave it in back and forth until it disappears, and that should keep it from wanting to unravel on you. Now that you've got your 2 edge ones on, you can decide how many you want to put in the middle. I like 5. I like 5 at this width for the size and weight of my little wall hanging, which I would consider as a kind of like a baby blanket sized wall hanging, so it's not very large. 5 of these little tabs should be more than enough, and I'm going to put one right in the middle, and then I'm going to put one in the middle of each of those spaces, sort of in between my end tabs and that middle tab. So I'm going to basically evenly place 3 more. You can place as many as you want. It is entirely up to you, and it doesn't matter how many stitches are in between. You're just eyeballing this. So for example, I know I want to make this a roughly 5 stitches. This feels like the middle for me. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to join my yarn on the first of those 5. Chain 2, that counts as a double crochet and it counts as my first stitch. Back loop only. So I back loop only, join with a slip stitch, back loop only, double crochet into each of the next 4 stitches, including if there's one being shared by your border, make sure you get that one too. If it's too tight, you can always use one stitch twice. So for example, instead of using this stitch, you could just put 2 double crochet into the back loop only stitch before or the back loop only stitch after. Doesn't matter. But I like to try and use the same stitch just so that it feels evenly displaced, or evenly distributed, I should say. There's my 5 double crochet. That includes the chain 2, turn, and it's the same as the other tabs. Double crochet in each stitch all the way across. Remember that first stitch counts as being used by your chain 2. Don't miss the top of the chain 2 when you get back to the end of the row. Double crochet in every stitch, including the top of the chain 2. Do that for 8 rows, or however many rows you need. Make sure they're all the same number of rows, and that whatever that number is, it's an even number. Then you're going to chain 1, fold your tab in half towards you, and slip stitch to create the seam. I'm going to do that for 3 more of these, and I'll be all done with my hanging tabs. Once you get all of your little tabs evenly distributed and attached, then all you have to do is thread your doweling through it. Now make sure if your doweling like mine has sort of finials that are firmly attached to it and don't come off, that your little tabs are tall enough that they can fit through. Obviously there's going to be a little bit of stretchiness to it, so you wouldn't have to worry about that too much. And if you have finials that are removable, then you don't have to worry about your tabs being any taller than is necessary to fit your doweling through. If you are adding more of these tabs because your blanket or your wall hanging or your curtains is bigger, you can make them wider. You can use as many as you need across the top. Just remember that the smaller the gaps in between, the less sagging or hanging you will have. The more strength is given to the overall hang, the more you have tabs and the wider they are. For a small little project like this one though, 5 is just enough. And the distribution process is the same. I would attach your first and second tabs on either end of your wall hanging first, and then worry about distributing the middle ones secondly. So maybe put the middle one in the middle. If you're making an even number of hangings, you can sort of evenly distribute 2 in the middle, and then evenly distribute again and again and again. And it just helps you kind of eyeball the space. The number of stitches that are or are not between your tabs isn't important. You're just eyeballing the general sort of spacing between your tabs. So this is a really simple project. Don't worry too much about being exact. You can always use a stitch once or twice or skip a stitch. What's happening here is that we are creating something even for our wall hanging to hang off of. We are not interfering with any of the border or any of the pretty little sort of extra bits that might be leaning over the edge if you've done something a little bit artistic like I did. And more importantly, you're ready to hang your wall hanging up on the wall. And there you go. Easy peasy. And like I said, it doesn't matter how many stitches are in between. It doesn't even matter how many of these little hangers you make or how wide or how skinny. It's specific to your project. Now I've found that 5 are just fine for this because it's a smaller project. It's like baby blanket size. But if you were making a much bigger project or you are concerned about the weight of your project, you can make them wider and you can make more of them. And you just eyeball where you put them. They don't have to be perfectly distributed. Just eyeball it. It'll work out just fine. We hope you enjoyed making this little project along with us, and we will see you soon here, very soon, on the Jade and Stitches Show for more fun. Until then, stay safe, stay crafty, and have a great week. Bye, guys!
Hi, everybody! Mr. and Stitches here. Thank you for watching today. Here are some of our other videos you might be interested in. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe.